Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may happen to be, and welcome to the Nautel Fall Webinar Series. This episode, your last two. I'm Jeff Welton, and joining me today, I have Alex Hartman with Optimized Media Group. Alex is, in full disclosure, about a month after this project was initiated, Alex joined us as a service tech. So now he's also a Nautel employee, so he gets dual credit. Alex, welcome.
Thank you. Morning, afternoon, wherever you are.
Also, I've got some recorded comments from the owner of WCLQ, Coy Sire, sorry, the general manager, my mistake. Coy is in the middle of their pledge drive, and for those of you who run non-commercial stations, you know what it's like trying to get away during pledge drive. But he did pre-record a couple of comments for me, so we'll play those. So we're voice tracking part of our presentation today. The topic is basically, when do you figure out if it's time to replace an aging piece of gear? And we're focusing mostly on tube transmitters because that's where we tend to see the biggest challenges when it comes to finding folks who are comfortable with engineering them, doing the maintenance on them, and more getting parts. So we'll take a look at how we do the math to figure out if we've got a valid case for doing that. And we'll talk about WCLQ with Coy's voice clips as a bit of a case study. Now, a couple of housekeeping things first. You do have a dashboard there. If you don't see it, there's a little red arrow somewhere toward the right-hand side of your screen. If you click on that, you will see the dashboard. And one of the things you can do is enter questions. If I see any questions, I'll tend to answer them as we go. So by all means, you know, if you've got a question, let us know. Also, if you're an SPE member, the completion of this webinar does qualify for a half a research credit under category I of the schedule. So by all means, keep track of having logged into the webinar as well. Certainly, we do keep track of that, so we can always help you out if you need any backing on that. But working with the SPE is always a pleasure. Now, a little bit ago, not too long ago, Radio World put out an ebook, and we did sponsor it, on whether you bought your last tube. And it talks about a lot of the things we're going to discuss today. So I did put the link here. Remember that this webinar will be archived under the resources tab of our website after we're done, so you can certainly get in there. So Alex, in the case of WCLQ, what were some of the factors, and remember, we'll get into Coy's reasoning later, but what were some of the factors that made you think about whether or not it was time to retire an actually working transmitter?
Well, it started out more of a conversation of parts, you know, calling the previous transmitter manufacturer and sourcing replacement parts. And then also tube costs and such like that. We were staring down a new tube and everything else. And WCLQ is very diligent on their maintenance. They do not, as a non-commercial station, they really can't tolerate off-air time because it directly affects their checkbook. So we started down the path of where's the smart money for them.
Right, and that makes sense. Now, you were talking about maintenance, and certainly I'm the first guy to say that I don't care what you're running, solid state or tube, there's still some maintenance required. Is it safe to say that the solid states require a little less, or is it just a different sort of maintenance?
I think it's a different maintenance. You know, you're not really, you know, scrubbing out tube cavities or replacing, you know, tube sockets, or in the case of Coy's transmitter there at CLQ, is, you know, the remote cards that the Continental uses internally, because there's live line voltage on those cards that can blow up and have been known to do so. So those types of products where it's that maintenance versus swapping out a power supply, or, you know, lowering that cost of engineering time to get in there and maintain the facility you're not waiting 3 or 4 days for someone to send you a card, or because you're completely off the air, versus you're just down a couple of kilowatts off of a power supply failure.
Right. And my argument, the one corollary I always use is cars. And just because you buy a new car doesn't mean you're not going to still do oil changes.
Correct. There's always the little maintenance-y things to keep things in line.
Now, the one thing we talk about a lot when we're looking at whether or not we need to replace a piece of gear is the return on investment. Are we going to see a savings in the power's consumption? Where this gets to be a challenge is when you look at it, you'll see things that the power bill, for example, may or may not give you things in easy to understand verbiage. I mean, you may have power rates at 3 or 4 different levels, depending on what you're talking about. So it's very important to have a good understanding of what your power bill is before you start. Because, if you make a change, and we'll discuss this in a bit too, but if you make a change and you don't see a difference, that can be somewhat disappointing. So it's always good to know how the bill breaks down first. Okay. In one of the things you can do, I better turn that highlighter off. Let's see if I can, there we go. One of the things you can do is we have a tool on our website, and it's a cost of operation calculator. So it basically looks at your output power, your hours per day if you're not running 24/7, and the nominal efficiency of your transmitter. Remember, this is DC efficiency, or AC efficiency rather, overall, not DC, not plate efficiency. So typically when you have an older transmitter, it'll have an efficiency number usually in the 60 or 70% range. And that is almost always going to be the DC efficiency, and that's not what you need for this. As a general rule of thumb, 45 to 65% is typical overall for a tube transmitter, depending on the modulator configuration, the age, etc. So having that number, and certainly you can always measure the current per phase with a clip-on ammeter and the volts per phase, and do the math to get the actual power consumption. And you can work the efficiency off the TPO from that just as easily. So, it's a little bit of math, but it works out pretty well. So in this case, we've got a grounded grid type of tube transmitter with a tube that they're running 1,800 a year. That'd be a rebuilt, I'm guessing. And yep. What's a tube run these days? Say a 3CX 20,000, and I haven't got a clue really.
They're catch of the day prices lately. I've seen them go for the rebuild side, anywhere from 1,600 all the way up to 3,200, and new you're well into, I've seen them as high as $7,000 or $8,000 for a new one. Wow.
Okay. So, and the lifespan you get will vary a lot depending again on configuration, the maintenance, and various other factors. I've seen as little as 11 months and as much as, I see a couple 3 years, but we're not seeing the 50 and 60,000 hours on a tube anymore. Is that accurate?
That is very accurate. The typical lifespan on a rebuilt tube doesn't matter the size. If you're pushing it, if you got a 20,000 watt tube and you're running a TPO of 19 and a half, the best you're getting these days is between 18 and 24 months, with it starting to fall off right around there and maybe lasting, right up to about 37, 38 months, depending on how fast it falls off. It's actually going down really quickly. Okay.
And so if we look at this and we work on the 45% overall efficiency, we know that our NVLT series is 72%. The GV series is the same in analog mode. 11.5 cents a kilowatt hour is a little high side depending where you are. It could be a little low side. It's below the average for the country, or for the U.S. rather. So it gives a general guideline. But as with that as an example, and looking at tube prices and allowing for a power supply failure a year, then you can see that we're talking over $1,000 a month in savings. And that's not an insignificant number. Now, one of the things that a lot of folks look at these days, and it's situational. You know, you're going to end up financing or leasing one way or the other. And so a lot of times we can do the lease calculation for you too and give you an idea. And so if we look, just skipping back to the last slide, if we look at the monthly savings on the power and parts, and that doesn't allow for, you know, paying Alex's salary if he's contract engineering. So it's even more than that, but we're pretty much making a lease payment with what we'd be saving with the new transmitter. In that case, that's a pretty easy decision. Now, that's not always going to be the case. Certainly, there's going to be much bigger differences or smaller differences in a lot of cases. You know, I've run into one or two situations where the difference was pretty minimal, and it was more the argument was made on reduced engineering requirements and fewer parts. So it will vary, obviously, from one situation to another. Now, as I said earlier, I did talk to Coy. I'll be the first to admit that I don't have a lot of voice tracking ability, and I don't have a nice board here. So we're going to point, click, and hope, and see if it works.
Jeff, it's my pleasure to respond. We are so grateful for what Nautel has done to help us to get ready for digital broadcasting. What I mean by that is just HD broadcasting. We have a plan for upgrading to other formats within our current Christian format. But besides that, the cost of tubes going up all the time and getting weaker and weaker, the cost for electricity, we thought it was time to just move forward and go to the Nautel 20 rather than just keep working with the Continental we had and hoping that I could get past retirement with it, but that would not be helpful to our listeners and the long range plan of our radio station.
So one of the other things Coy had mentioned when we were talking earlier was about a reliability issue they've been having. I'm going to let him put it in his words, and then I'm going to get Alex as the engineer to explain it in a little more technical fashion. But this is Coy's thoughts on the overall reliability as well.
The other selling point for us, well, besides, I mean, there are several selling points. The other one was the fact that my understanding from our engineer is that with our tube transmitter, there's always going to be a little bit of fade in our frequency. And every time we went down, because we do have what we call a hot tower, where cell groups do red. And when we power down and power up, that's always an issue with getting us back on frequency correctly. What's really nice about this Nautel is it maintains our 89.5 frequency with no drift. And that's huge for us, just because we do have an interfering station about an hour and a half to 2 hours away. And this allows us to stay right on that 89.5 and not have to battle their 89.5 if we happen to see some drift because of the tube issues, heating and cooling up at our transmitter site. So I think just staying on frequency is another big selling point for us.
Okay, Alex, now can you clarify that a little? I mean, staying on frequency is not something I usually consider to be a situation anymore.
Yeah, usually it's not. This particular site and this transmitter has a history. That transmitter was bought by WCLQ, used twice over. So it's on its third frequency change as well. So over time, and we've worked with Continental to try and rectify it, but the original exciter, as you can see in the picture here, the air conditioning is right next to the transmitter. So when we shut down the transmitter for tower maintenance or other kind of maintenances, we get down, for a couple hours working on stuff there, it would actually come back up off frequency because the cavity had warped or something had changed, a value is changing somewhere. The original exciter, the TCXO wasn't exactly the greatest. So it would come up like, instead of 89.50, it would come up on 89.57 or 89.71. It was known to do that. The easiest solution was replace the internal exciter once it did finally fail with an external one. Well, that kept the frequency a lot better. The tube cavity warping was an issue with this thing. So it would get cold and it would change value, and that's where he was seeing the frequency shift. Along with as tubes age, you get more AM noise, which degrades your perceived reception distance. So with no tube, you don't have that problem. So that's really what Koya was talking about. From day one, we turned it on instantly. He had better coverage than he had ever seen because of the idiosyncrasies of the Continental.
Cool. And I mean, that's, to be fair, that's not specifically a Continental thing. It's more a history and
design thing.
A combination of a whole bunch of things. Yeah. But overall, I mean, I know I was really happy to see that he was impressed with that. Now, one of the other things that we had discussed, and I'm going to have to click through his audio again. There we go. So shortly after he got the transmitter, he took a look at the power bill. And when did you guys turn that transmitter on?
October 7th of this year was the first day it went on.
So at this point, it had been on somewhere in the 4 or 5 days, roughly.
Correct.
And you know, the one thing I like about his provider, their power bill, they show the average temperature, so you can get an idea whether the ambient air was part of the reason that you changed the power bill to heat and cool a little more. But you see a significant difference. Now, there wasn't a lot of off-air time in the process of changing, no?
No, not at all. The total off-air time was less than 5 hours.
Okay, cool. And Coy did make a comment too on the electricity use, so I'm going to just play that little clip as well.
Happy with the product so far. I mean, it's only been a few weeks, and I looked at our electric usage since we've installed the Nautel versus the Continental, and it's at least, it's a minimum of about a 20% reduction in electric use. Now, some of that could be weather related. We'll find out over the next couple of months, but we are very grateful for you. We're very grateful for the product you guys have provided for us. It was easy to just transition to it. We're so grateful for the options that we have remotely with the product, and look forward to many, many years of using the Nautel, and look forward to getting our other channels, our HD channels going in the not too distant future. And thanks again for working with us.
Okay, so, you know, the funny thing is, and this comes back to what I was talking about before, and Alex and I have been discussing it offline this morning a little bit, because so Coy also, whoops, jumped ahead a little bit there, but oh no, I didn't. Coy has also got the power bill for his last month, and the funny thing is that the savings in the last month are minimal. And we know that the power consumption's gone down. We actually had measured data from the old transmitter, so we know the power consumption's gone down a lot. But the best guess at the moment, and this is just a guess, is that the power company may be estimating the bill for the last month. Alex, thoughts on that? Because you were there when I presented it this morning.
Right, yeah, and that is a very distinct possibility. And also the station has a negotiated rate with the utility for demand power. So there might be a power factor adjustment in there that we're not aware of. So they, you know, when you make something more efficient, you don't draw nearly the amount of power you say you're going to pull, they may adjust your rate for you. So like Jeff mentioned, your power bill, understanding how your utility company works with you to figure out what your power savings is can be very, very complex.
And in a lot of cases, it's a good idea to talk to your power company ahead of time. Some utilities, especially some of the primary utilities where they have to farm out a lot of the excess power, or have folks buying it up, and surprisingly, you can run out of watts. Who knew? But one of the things a lot of them will do, if you can show that you're going to decrease your consumption by X%, a lot of them will actually provide you with a financial incentive to do so. So it may help offset the cost of new equipment in a lot of cases as well. Now, that will vary a lot, again, from one transmitter to another, from one utility to another. So it is critical to have measured data whenever possible so that you can verify whether you are or aren't going to be seeing a specific result. Now, one thing we're doing at the moment is we've got a promotion going on that you'll be seeing about if you haven't already seen. And the big flashy words, of course, upgrade, will buy back, and get up to this. Now, I put the fine print on the left side of the slide just so that we didn't have to get out the magnifying glass. But it does last until the end of 2020, or the end of January 2020, which closes at our 50th anniversary and starts 51. And we do need to be replacing a tube transmitter. Marketing folks do want a picture of the new transmitter installed and the one that got replaced so they could put it up on the website. And in order to be sure we're looking at apples and apples, we would like to see a receipt for the new tube, or for the last tube you bought, sorry, whether new or rebuilt, irrelevant. And there is, of course, a limit on it, because if you're running, I ran into a situation the other day with a guy running an old 25 kilowatt transmitter on a 5 kilowatt license. He was only running 5 kilowatts, but you know, I'm not sure I want to credit the full price of a 3CX 25,000 off a 5 kilowatt transmitter. So certainly we do have a few conditions there, but we're certainly happy to work with you. Alex, is there anything else that you can think about that we should be bringing up, that I should be mentioning?
Well, the one big thing for WCLQ specifically, and a lot of guys are, you know, a lot of station owners have to have the same, you know, conversation with their technical staff, or even arguments with their sales staff sometimes, is the reason we did replace a perfectly working tube transmitter is that it was a perfectly working tube transmitter. The station was not off the air. They were not losing money. They were not, you know, in dire straits. When tube transmitters or any transmitter fails, and then, you know, you call Continental, Gates, whoever made it, and try to get a part for a 25-year-old box, you could be waiting 3-4 months and that means off air time. So now you're panicking to find the money to upgrade or replace or get yourself back on the air. This gave WCLQ a viable backup option for any circumstance, and that's really how you have to present it to your management and ownership. Is the time to do this is while they're working and working fine, not when they're a smoldering hot mess on the floor.
Exactly. One other point to mention with that, and this comes back to the oil changes, is when you relegate a tube transmitter to standby, you do need to run it on a regular basis, because tubes do gas up. And you know, the things show their age. A car wears out faster sitting in the yard than it does running down the road. So by all means, you need to do that. But one other thing that is critical is you need to be aware of what impact that may or may not have on the demand portion of your power bill. So I've got customers that run in the tube for more than 15 seconds with the main on air, will drive the bill up for the entire year. Now, that'll vary again from one utility to another. What they do in their case is they run the generator, run the standby transmitter on the genset, gives the generator a load test and gives the transmitter a test. Alex?
Yep, that's a perfectly great idea and works in practice. If you don't have the ability of a generator or even a dummy load or whatever, you do have to run them. You know, just like a car, they don't do well just sitting in the driveway. You know, they just rot away, just like anything else out there. So yeah, you do have to run them and make sure that they're reliable. It's, you know, just like your generators. You know, everybody has that horror story of they went to turn on the generator and it didn't crank over. Well, probably because you didn't turn it on for 6 months, or it went through a winter, or you missed the oil change, or whatever the reason. You have to keep them going, you know, move the stuff around a little bit. In our case, electrons, and in generators' case, the oil. So absolutely make sure that you're running these things if you're going to do that type of a setup. And the you know, I've seen guys who are running old 20H3s as standby still, and they're happy to do it. And they'll turn on, but they're not, you know, they're not ready for 24/7 use anymore. They've been in use for 60+ years. So those are the kinds of things where you put these guys into retirement. Yeah, get them out of the garage every once in a while. Take them for a drive. But
And
don't.
So Andy Lowe asked a good question. How often should you run one and for how long? And I mean, my general rule of thumb is at least a couple of minutes a month, but is there anything more specific?
The older the transmitter, it really isn't a good rule of thumb. A couple minutes a month is a good one. What I like to go by is if you're doing it like a lot of guys do a quarterly maintenance program. What I do is, on a quarterly, you're going out to the site, you're going to clean your air filters, do all this other stuff anyway, and you're there for a couple hours. Put the standby on for those couple of hours. Get the legs stretched, because a couple of minutes a month doesn't allow for the complete up to temperature type of things or variations of swing, environmental stuff, everything. It needs to go. It needs to run for an hour or so. So the quarterly is usually when I recommend my customers go for that.
Okay, good idea. And I mean, I know my generator, the one in the house, I run that 15 minutes a month because I discovered over this past winter that if I don't, after about 3 months, the battery's pretty flat. And of course, you only discover something like that when you're on the road and the power goes out and the real boss goes to hit the button and nothing happens. So
there is that.
Lesson learned. We won't be doing that again. Now,
right.
So, sorry, go ahead, Alex.
So transmitters and generators, apples to oranges, they do have different maintenance schedules. Always, if you're the guy maintaining your generator, you set up your own schedule, make sure management's aware of the schedule. I realize a lot of the bigger broadcasters, the only time you're allowed to do this kind of thing is at the 3 in the morning, because what if your tube transmitter doesn't have an HD component? You got to take the HDs off air, so on and so forth. But they do need to be exercised, and you do need to stress that to management. Say, hey, we have this. We really need to make sure it's still working.
Right, and I mean, depending what your power situation is, if you're running it on air, it may be worth investing in a dummy load and running it on the load.
Absolutely, that was the CLQ's cases. We do have a dummy load, and we are running it into a load in this particular instance.
There you go. Now, we do have other online information. We've got the Waves newsletter. As I mentioned earlier, the webinar, this will be archived along with all of our other webinars, and you can find them either through the resources tab on our website and webinars, or most of them are also hosted on our YouTube channel. So certainly I don't see any other questions, and I hope that's because we covered them as we went, but certainly you can find me by email also on our website. If you don't know how to find me already, as I said, Alex has joined the support department recently, so you can always find him through our website if through no other way. So on that note, I want to thank you very much and have a great day. Alex, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.